The Fateful Overture. It all began on an ordinary morning, but the energy in the air that day felt inexplicably strange, as if every vibration from the sea was a subtle prelude to something epic. Our fisherman, usually stoic and weather-worn from years at sea, felt an odd tremor in his chest as he slid his calloused hands over the wooden hull of his humble boat. He exhaled a measured breath, lungs filled with the scent of brine, diesel, and the faint trace of hope that always accompanied him offshore. The sky was a pastel tapestry with clouds smudged like secrets waiting to be sung. Beneath the serene surface, however, was an undercurrent of tension, ripples in the song of the ocean hinting at discord to come. The fisherman prepared methodically, checking his lines, sorting through weathered nets, humming an old sea shanty under his breath. He barely noticed the way the melody clung to the air, lingering like mist, scaffolding his resolve for the unknown. That morning, the quiet was unnerving. Gone were the usual gulls cawing in discordant harmony. Instead, an expectant hush sat on the water, each lapping wave another silent note in a growing suspense. His only companion this trip was a fellow fisherman, a friend who matched his rhythm stroke for stroke, laughter for laughter, the two often singing duets to the wind in their shared solitude. Today their voices were subdued, the chorus stilled by a sense of foreboding. The engine started with a cough and a hopeful rumble, but even this seemed more muted, less triumphant than usual. As the boat moved away from the embrace of the shoreline, the world behind them faded into an indistinct memory, like the fading echo of an overture before the curtains rise. At that moment, neither man realized that they were setting sail not toward another routine catch, but toward a sprawling symphony of calamity that would challenge every note of their endurance. There was a peculiar harmony in the ordinary rituals that day, packing food, double-checking supplies, measuring out water with mathematical precision. Yet everything felt as though it belonged to a song he'd never heard before, a prelude drenched in the minor key of uncertainty. The sun glimmered on the waves with unnatural brightness, each reflection a silent metronome ticking down to the moment the music would change forever. He remembered the old tales, sung by elders in smoky taverns, about men lost at sea and the ballads of return or despair. The fisherman wondered if those stories so full of fate and longing had ever truly prepared anyone for their own opening movement upon an endless blue stage. That morning, unknown to him, he had composed the first line of his own epic, a single trembling note that would echo across the world's greatest concert hall, the ocean itself. Adrift in the vast symphony. To be lost at sea is unlike any other loss. It deafens, it isolates, and it smothers the will to sing. Out in the infinite blue with no horizon but hope's faint outline, the fisherman and his companion became mere notes lingering on the wind, scattered in a score written by fate and indifference. Each day was a new movement, sometimes frantic, sometimes slow, and always uncertain, composed of hunger's gnawing rhythm, the fevered percussion of a racing heart, and the constant haunting drone of the waves. The ocean, vast and merciless, was both conductor and orchestra, dictating every tempo and casting its own melody of despair. The boat, once a vessel of purpose, was now an island of memory floating in an endless void. At dawn, the faint orange light would brush the water's surface, painting it with possibilities, only to fade by midday into a harsh, blinding glare. During these hollow afternoons, the fisherman often sat with his knees to his chest, rocking slightly with the rhythm of the waves, listening as his stomach growled in a counterpoint to the distant cries of unseen seabirds. Each bodily ache, every pang of thirst became another instrument playing in the unyielding ballad of survival. He measured time not in hours or days but in repetitions of the sea's eternal chorus, the slap of water against wood, the susurration of wind through the makeshift sail, the keening whistle that rose with the brewing storms. There was no past or future here, only the present, strung taut as a bow, vibrating with anxiety and cold resignation. At night the stars offered a silent lullaby, their flickering light shimmering across the breakers like so many scattered notes. He found himself humming to stave off madness, drawing on distant memories of songs sung on safer shores. Sometimes, when his companion would join in for just a moment, the ocean's terrifying hugeness seemed to soften, as if yielding to the fragile music of persistent hearts. Even so, this symphony was never harmonious. Panic, like a discordant note, would rise with every squall, and despair would thrum low and mournful beneath hopeful refrains. With rations dwindling, with thirst scarring their throats and salt licking their skin to rawness, the two men became both performers and prisoners within this aquatic opera. There were no intermissions, only crescendos of need and diminuendos of energy as the days stretched unbroken into the unknown. But in the most desperate undertones of the sea's relentless music, the fisherman began to realize that, in order to endure, he and his companion must learn not only to survive the elements, but to harmonize, however imperfectly, with nature's immense, indifferent song. Variations on the motif of survival, far from being a single, defiant melody, is a constant improvisation played across the fretboard of suffering. With every passing day, I was forced to invent new refrains for the same unyielding theme, staying alive. Hunger was the baseline, low and menacing, thumping in my belly. Thirst became a piercing solo, stabbing through my thoughts. But no overture of desperation could drown out the will to endure, and so I trained myself to listen to the music of possibility, however faint it might be. I learned to wield all my senses as instruments in a symphony of adaptation. The whispery flutter of fish breaking the water alerted me to hunt with my hands. The nets, long useless or lost. I read the angular hop of birds above the swells as sheet music leading me to new food, sometimes even guiding me to steal a raw egg or the flesh of a careless gull. On those rare days when the sky broke and droplets pattered down, I grasped at the melody of rain, opening my mouth and collecting each liquid note as if it were the sweetest aria. Every sound became a motif of hope, the tapping of a turtle against the boat, the slap of a jellyfish against my bare skin, even the rhythm of my blood pounding in my ears as I fought for scraps of sustenance. A single drop of moisture, a mouthful of slithering flesh, what would once have disgusted me now triggered something akin to joy, a new and desperate music of gratitude and survival. At times a tiny musical cue, a droplet of water, a weak gasp from my companion or the creak of the battered hull, moved me to tears. There among the relentless percussion of the sea, I found myself humming fragments of forgotten lullabies. These became my shield against collapse, a personal improvisation against despair's suffocating silence. Each moment of adaptation became a new movement, a variation on the relentless motif, survive, survive, survive. In this way the concert of endurance continued, relentless and raw, with hope the faint but stubborn refrain leading me onward. The crescendo of adversity. The days reached a fever pitch, each passing one amplifying the suffering into a relentless crescendo. Hunger was a brutal percussion, beating with savage regularity. The sun's glare became a blinding solo, merciless and uncompromising, skin blistered from salt and sun, mouths split with thirst, muscles cried out in muted agony. And then, like the moment in any great symphony when melody turns tragic, the fisherman's last companion fell sick, his breathing a sad diminuendo, weakening as each day passed. Despair echoed louder with every labored breath. The dying man's presence weighed heavily, every cough and wince a new note of dread. The fisherman clung to hope, grasping at fragments of past duets, singing softly while tending to his friend, trying to weave a counter-melody against the encroaching silence. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow brought fresh alarms. One morning the inevitable coda arrived, the companion's last breath escaping over the endless blue, a final dissonant note swallowed by the sea's indifferent song. Alone now, the fisherman was left not only with the emptiness of hunger, thirst and exhaustion, but also the echo of lost friendship, a piercing, inescapable refrain that colored every moment that followed. The loneliness was not quiet. It roared like an orchestra in full force, each wave slamming the boat underscoring the isolation. The fisherman's mind circled around the loss relentlessly, composing elegies with every heartbeat, uncertain if the symphony would ever resolve. But somewhere deep inside, the music of endurance, the will to outlast even the darkest movement, mustered a trembling, determined reply. The solitary solo. The echoes of hope. There are certain silences that linger between the rolling waves, gaps in the world's great symphony where hope's faint melody struggles to break through. In the fisherman's isolation, every day might have seemed like a reprise of the last, yet somewhere amid the ceaseless chorus of wind and water, a new motif quietly emerged. It was quiet at first, like an uncertain note in an unpracticed sonata, but it pulsed insistently, the kind of longing that will not stay silent. Each morning he would search the horizon, eyes aching and heart tuned to the dissonant orchestra of the sea. The ocean's vastness dwarfed him, its relentless salt-stained percussion beat away at his hope, but never quite managed to smother it. Sometimes a distant shape would blur against the horizon, a speck, a moving shadow, a glint of something not made by nature. At those moments, hope soared like a crescendo. Heart racing, he would wave frantically, arms windmilling a frantic semaphore to the indifferent expanse, and shout until his voice fractured, each note of desperation hanging, unanswered, in the humid air. On moonless nights he dreamed of rescue as if it were a lullaby, woven into the rhythmic lap of water against wood. These were the hours when raw longing hummed beneath his skin, reverberating like the plucked string of an instrument seeking harmony. Even the slap of a leaping fish or the distant chatter of unseen birds became unexpected motifs in his ever-expanding composition of hope. Sometimes he imagined the thunder of engines far off, the industrial rumble of salvation, a sound so out of place in his watery world that he almost doubted his own senses. But oh, how his heart would leap at the imagined reverberation. He became a composer conducting a symphony only he could hear, orchestrating every sound into a fugue of anticipation and yearning. There were days when hope felt like a cruel refrain, offering the promise of rescue only to fade, unresolved, before the cadence could land. Yet he clung to these echoes of hope as fiercely as he did to his own life. He scribbled imagined rescue songs in his mind, writing lyrics to the rhythm of the waves. Even when clouds swallowed the sun or storms threatened to drown his melody, he borrowed from hope's fragile chord to carry himself into another dawn. It wasn't always harmonious. Sometimes his faith fractured into minor keys, shadowed with doubt, but hope, like the sea, was impossible to quiet for long. It would always return, echoing back from horizon to horizon, as persistent and vital as breath itself. Symphony with nature. From the moment I found myself adrift, stripped of everyday comforts and cast into an endless blue, the ocean transformed into both adversary and companion. For most, nature is a backdrop, the rustle of leaves outside a window, the distant thunder on a restless night. Here, with nothing but sea stretching infinitely in all directions, every shift in the elements became part of my own living symphony. I began to notice how the sun's ascent was not just a change in light but the first triumphant notes of a day's composition. The sky, a canvas of shifting hues, painted harmonics that I'd never stopped to study before. Each dawn was its own overture, the murmur of waves joining in a slow crescendo as the wind brushed my face with morning's tender allegretto. Rainstorms, once annoyances back on land, became complex percussion solos, drumming against my makeshift shelter, each droplet adding a staccato pulse to the orchestration of survival. Every downpour brought both dread and relief. The patterned tap of rain on wood was my cue: drink, collect, savor. Even the silence between storms rang with possibility, anticipation humming through the air like a suspended chord. At noon, when the sun hammered mercilessly on my shoulders, the atmosphere would shift. The water's surface glinted with 1,000 mirrored melodies, each ripple and swell refracting sunlight into dancing sparks. The heat could be punishing, yet with eyes closed, I let the steady rhythm of my heart set pace to nature's midday movement, finding counterpoint even within discomfort. Evenings on the open sea belonged to the winds. Sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, their moods swept across my battered craft, sculpting my emotions like a conductor guiding strings from pianissimo to fortissimo. The breeze carried memories, whispers of laughter and warmth from a distant shore, braided with the sharp tang of salt that reminded me how fragile, how raw, my place in this ecosystem remained. Then came the nights, draped in a sonata of stars. With each gentle roll of the boat, the sky performed its silent symphony. I would lie on my back, gaze tracing constellations, and let the cool darkness settle over me like velvet. My mind drifted, sometimes aching from the day, sometimes peacefully blank, always soothed by the hush and hum of distant currents. In those moments I felt both infinitely tiny and momentously alive. I tracked time not in hours, but in tides. The waxing and waning of the moon pulled on my thoughts as much as it did the restless sea, marking the rhythm of endurance and hope. The sheer unpredictability of weather became a lesson in humility, a reminder that I was but one note in a primordial composition, subject to forces greater than myself but also able to shape my existence through harmony rather than resistance. Living within this grand concerto, I learned to surrender and participate. I listened not only with my ears but with every sense sharpened by necessity and awe. Nature, I realized, was never static. Every moment was imbued with change, sometimes subtle, sometimes violent, but always part of a larger, breathtaking score. I found comfort in this perpetual movement, and more than once believed it was the music of the world itself that carried me toward survival. The undercurrents and swells of emotion. There are stretches of the ocean where the surface deceives, where beyond the gentle lull of the waves, mighty undercurrents twist far beneath, silent but relentless. Alone at sea, I discovered my emotions mirrored this hidden turbulence. Each day brought its own secret tides, not just the physical movement of water but a ceaseless flux within my own mind. The ocean's face might be calm and blue, but below, invisible maelstroms tugged at my sense of equilibrium, hope and dread wrestling just out of sight. Some mornings defiance would surge through me like a rogue wave. My heart pounded with a wild, desperate rhythm. I ached to scream all my fears into the wind, to let each howl fuse with the primal chorus of the sea. Over and over storms of anger roiled within me, anger at fate, at chance, at the sheer indifference of this infinite expanse. That fury, in rare moments, could drag me out of apathy. I would brace myself, take stock, fight for inspiration even while the world seemed intent on erasing me. These days my voice became an instrument, a trumpet for my pain and frustration, launched into the salty emptiness. Yet other times melancholy pulled me down into endless troughs. Doubt crept in like fog, quietly seeping into my every thought. I sang old lullabies to myself, lullabies once meant to soothe children, now coaxing whatever fragments of comfort I could muster. These soft, wavering notes drifted over the water, as if seeking a shore that could cradle me in return. Sometimes tears crept out, hidden in the corners of my eyes, indistinguishable from mist or sea spray, the evidence of a spirit stretched to transparency. Loneliness sharpened everything. In every moment of silence, memory filled the void, flashes of laughter around warm tables, the gentle pressure of a companion's hand, the effortless harmony of belonging. As the days bled into one another, I began to invent music in my head. Entire orchestras conjured from memory and longing, conducting symphonies that no one else would ever hear. In these imagined concerts, each emotion, a pang of regret, an upwelling of gratitude, a burst of nostalgia, emerged as a new melody line, twisting and twining through my internal landscape. Sometimes hope itself rose like the crescendo of violins, urgent and bright. Other times resignation hummed beneath it all, the quiet bass note that refused to disappear. Each new ordeal brought a shift, a sudden modulation in the ongoing composition of my feelings. The taste of rain on my lips after days of thirst could lift me from despair to near euphoria. Conversely, hour after hour of silence and sameness might grind me to a brittle, barely audible diminuendo. In those times I clung to the smallest audible note, the slap of water, the whisper of wind, finding in them the proof that I was still part of the world's great ongoing song. Somewhere amid the storm of my emotions, I learned that survival was never only about the body. To live, truly live, meant contending with the shifting weather inside myself as fiercely as with the storms outside. And just as the ocean never held one mood for long, neither did I. My emotional symphony was ever-changing, unpredictable but somehow enduring, carrying me forward atop each heaving, unseen wave. The crest of the miracle wave. After countless days adrift, battered by harsh seas and relentless sun, there comes a point where spirit and body feel almost indivisible from the vast, roiling expanse. I remember the way exhaustion settled deep into my joints, a heaviness that seemed insurmountable, and how even hope itself would sometimes thin out across the horizon like a distant, wavering light. Yet, at this darkest bottom, something extraordinary began to swell beneath the surface, a quiet, defiant energy that gathered force just beneath the fatigue and the hunger. It was on a night so thick with salt and silence that it felt almost otherworldly when I first sensed the universe turning in my favor. The wind shifted with a sharper bite, and the ocean's relentless lull suddenly grew turbulent. Instinct bristled along my skin, the air electrified as though a great unseen crescendo was poised to break. In those minutes the boat's fragile hull danced perilously atop swelling waves, rising higher than ever before. My senses were stretched to their limits, noticing the subtle gradations in the water's motion, the almost imperceptible fade of the horizon as black clouds massed above. Then, as if summoned by the years of longing, a colossal wave surged beneath my craft. I rode atop its crest, clutching to life as the sky and sea converged in a chaos of foam and roar. In that wild ascent, my fear was both sharpened and erased. I was nothing, and yet I was fiercely, achingly alive. The rush of wind battered hope back into me with a force I thought had long since ebbed away. Every muscle burned, every thought fixated on the single truth. Survival was not only possible, it was imminent, tangible, almost holy. When the tempest finally hurled me toward that unfamiliar coral atoll on a distant horizon, disbelief and ecstasy warred inside me. I barely remembered how my hands worked, how each motion felt both dreamlike and profoundly real as I scrambled from wreck to sand. The sound of breaking surf crashing against solid land was a symphony I'd never dared to compose, each crash a triumphant note in the wild overture of living. Strangers' voices called out, their words indistinguishable, but every syllable was threaded with the music of rescue, connection, and rebirth. Only in that breathless aftermath did I realize that everything before had been an unrelenting prelude to this singular miraculous moment, when determination, fate, and the indomitable wave of life all swept me toward a shore I never expected to see again. This was the crest of my miracle. Not merely survival but a full, exultant return to the world's embrace, a living proof that even the most punishing seas can deliver you to the harmonies of hope and humanity. Finale. Returning to be the master of life's music. Returning to solid ground after such an epic, harrowing odyssey feels nothing short of surreal. At first, the noise and color of civilization crash over me like a tidal wave. Laughter tumbling from crowded marketplaces, the shout of street vendors, the tantalizing aroma of food wafting through the air, and the firm, unmoving certainty of earth beneath my feet. Every sight and sound has a new electric sharpness. People eye me with a mixture of awe and skepticism, as if I'm a legend that's wandered off the page and into their ordinary lives. Yet only I know the private score, the thundering symphony of all I've endured and learned on that endless sea. I find myself more alert, more present than ever, attuned to every note that makes up daily life. The clatter of dishes, the idle hum of distant engines, the simple chirping of birds, each is a celebration, a stanza in the ongoing melody I am writing as I move forward. My relationship with the world has shifted. Gone is the complacency I carried. Now I recognize the fragile, miraculous beauty in every fleeting moment. Comforts once taken for granted, a sip of fresh water, the warmth of a meal among friends, take on the grand significance of some triumphant chord at the close of a masterpiece. Old habits try to claim me, and routine attempts to fold me back into the expected patterns. Sometimes I sense an undertow of indifference or disbelief from those around me, as if my story is too outsized for their reality. But I know what it means to taste the music of survival, to confront oblivion and return with an unshakable harmony in my chest. I have learned to be the conductor of my own life, shaping each day with intention, humility, and gratitude. There are still moments of darkness. Trauma doesn't dissolve in sunlight or applause, sometimes echoes of isolation return, and anxiety pulls me back toward invisible currents. When this happens, I close my eyes, summon the symphony of wind and water that sustained me, and remember that even a single brave note can resound against the overwhelm. There is power in simplicity, in connection, in staying open to every emotion, just as I learned out there on the vast, indifferent stage of the ocean. My survival is not just a tale for others to marvel at, it is a gentle call to live as fully as possible, to listen deeply to the music of the world, to honor each heartbeat, every sigh, every laughter and tear. The adventure shaped me, but it's the life I compose now, day by day, that truly defines who I am. In the great unfinished symphony of existence, I intend to remain both soloist and conductor, crafting beauty from even the smallest notes, and never forgetting the wonder that waits in every ordinary dawn. The Unfinished Symphony. Even after my body had returned to solid ground, I realized that the truest journey of survival never truly ends. Each day on land felt both familiar and profoundly different, as if I was a note, once lost in the ocean's orchestration, but now vibrating with a resonance only those who have been to the edge can understand. The world around me bustled with ordinary rhythms, the chatter of crowds, the distant hum of traffic, the laughter tumbling from open windows, yet in the back of my mind the subtle cadence of the ocean, the pulse that had governed my existence for so long, never faded fully from my ears. In quiet moments, I still heard it. It haunted the silence between conversations, the hush just before dawn, the stillness after the last song of night's insects faded. The unfinished symphony of my experience played on, each movement richer for the scars and triumphs it contained. I had learned to listen for its echoes, not as reminders of suffering but signals that life itself is a composition in progress, a sonata whose final chord has yet to sound. I found myself more attuned than ever to the subtle music of living. Small acts of kindness struck my heart like clear bright trills. A gentle breeze bending the grass set off memories of wind-whipped waves. Even moments of heartache or confusion became motifs in the grand piece still unfolding. My gratitude for these experiences was deeper now, seasoned by the knowledge of what it means to nearly vanish and return remade. Sometimes I'd catch a stranger's eye across a crowded street, or hear the simple lilt of a songbird at sunset, and my soul would answer with its own wordless refrain, "I am still here." The unfinished song of my survival was not a matter of longing for what was lost, but of honoring the symphony I continued to shape each day. I understood that every new challenge, relationship, disappointment, and joy added layer upon layer to a story that was never meant to be complete. Survival, I realized, is not the finale. It is the motif that allows life's score to build, crest, and begin again. My purpose was not to seek the end, but to play my part, fearless, true, and always listening, while the music remained unresolved, forever inviting me onward.